Morning everyone, it's Ange Sinclair from Digestive Detective. Today we're going to talk about food that influences the microbiome. But first of all, I want to start by giving you a little bit of detail around this. So there are many factors that influence our microbiome: our age, our genetics, the environmental factors, so where we live and who we live with, whether we use pre and probiotics, how they go, use of antibiotics, use of hormones, our hormones, hormones in our environment, illness, injury, whether you were vaginally born or C-section impacts how your microbiome works. Also, whether you were breastfed also impacts how your microbiome works too. Hi Deb, how you going? So how many antibiotics you've had in the first 3 years of your life is really critical to how your microbiome forms, so this can impact as well. So the food we feed ourselves and our gut microbiomes turn nutrients into energy by fermenting the non-digestible pieces of food that are contained in the plant polysaccharides. So basically there's structures in plants that don't break down, like cellulose and starches. So we can't break them down physically, but the gut bacteria can. So there is really good evidence that in as little as 4 days you can change your microbiome. And that was a study done around people on junk food diets who were junk food people that ate junk food regularly and then changed their diet to a healthier diet. So in 4 days that impacted them. So while it's good to note that it can change, there has been some research around people who are called non-responders. So their microbiome doesn't change no matter what they do with them based on diet. So there are, and it's not a huge amount of people in the testing, but it does come up that some people don't change to dietary intervention. So that's good to know. So some things to think about is that the lower your microbial diversity, I'm having trouble with my words this morning, your higher level of inflammation in your body. So the whole insight would be for us to lower the levels of inflammation we have, and we can do this through diet if we're strict enough. So as an overview of what we should eat, it's recommended for women we should have about 28 grams of fibre a day, and for men about 34 grams of fibre. That's a lot of fibre, and I know from clinical practice and experience that most Australians are not eating that. And the Americans who will watch this, probably even less for you guys. I find most people sit between 12 and 15 grams, which is really problematic. And hence that's probably why in Australia right now we have a surge in bowel cancer between 24-year-olds and 29-year-olds. So what's really interesting in this demographic is they're the Uber generation, eats where they eat lots of burgers and stuff like that. So there are big changes afoot with how our kids eat and things like that. So it's always good to be mindful of that. The other thing is the microbiome, the bacteria actually synthesize B vitamins and vitamin K. So useful, really useful for our energy production and our blood clotting factors. Hi, Alison. So that's really important. So poor quality diets, which are really high in animal proteins and processed meat, these diets are much higher in saturated fats, in refined grains, sugar and salt. And I know, like everybody else, I was caught up in the, oh yeah, saturated fat's good for you, but I can see in stool testing that having a high saturated fat diet really does impact the microbiota and the specific microbes that produce more hydrogen sulfide, which can go on to give you stinky farts and gas and can lead to colon cancer. So having a moderate amount of fat is really good. So the other thing is high alcohol, high corn fructose derived syrup is a really big thing too. These diets essentially will reduce the level of microbial diversity. They increase the level of pathogenic bacteria that we get, and they increase our inflammation. They also erode the mucus layer of your stomach, so we have a little layer in there that stops things from getting through and feeds some of the good bacteria. When that erodes, the bacteria starve essentially, so they start to eat your gut wall, and then you get levels of intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. So it's always important to remember that. These diets, the whole high saturated fat, low veg, all that sort of thing, high alcohol, they increase the level of inflammation, but they also decrease the level of short-chain fatty acids. So what short-chain fatty acids are, there's a few of them that we make note of. So butyrate, propionate, and polyamines. So these are short-chain fatty acids that maintain the gut bacteria integrity in the colon and in the small intestine, so it's sort of all the way through. They stop in the bacteria. They have endotoxins built into their structure. And so what happens in this structure, essentially when they feed or they gorge themselves, they explode, and these little endotoxins, or even when they die, they explode, and these little endotoxins float around in your bloodstream, and they hit the inside of your gut wall, and they make it really, really sensitive. So they give you pain, give you gut problems, give you urgency generally. Everybody has these things, but depending on the different levels of microbial diversity you could have a higher a level of these, and they will cause you grief. Like I see some people that have a really, really high level of sensitivity, pain sensitivity, and they obviously have a problem with endotoxins. So the other things that short-chain fatty acids do, they enhance your motility, so they help you go to the bathroom properly, and they lower inflammation right through the whole GIT tract. So it's not just in your colon and in your small intestines, it's right through from your mouth down. So it's really good to include these. The biggest thing of all they do, though, is they feed our colon cells, and it's really important that we take care of these cells, because the lining of our colon is 4 cells thick, so it's minuscule. You couldn't even see it under the human eye. So these keeps stuff from coming into the digestive system, and it also stops the stuff that's in there from going out, which would be problematic. So we really need to take care of these. So the diet we predominantly want to eat is mainly plant foods. Now, I'm not advocating for a vegan or vegetarian diet, and I know they're successful for some people, but I find for most they are not, because we are not very good at that. But I would suggest to you that it is high in fruit and veg, it is high in fiber, it is high in monounsaturated fats, for example, olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, those sorts of things, because they increase the microbial diversity, they increase the colonization, they help with our overall gut balance for our immune system, and they increase that healthy mucus layer I was talking about before, which we need. And by eating those sorts of things too, it also increases our levels of short-chain fatty acids. And we've just talked about what they're really good for. So high in fruit and veg, high in fiber, high in monounsaturated fats, and high in omega-3s as well. So the best diet that's out there, if I had to pick a diet, I don't like to pick a diet, but if somebody said to me, what diet's the best, I would say to you, think about the Mediterranean diet. And there's so much research around the Mediterranean diet. It's worth focusing on some of the good stuff in that. So it's a high intake of non-refined grains, lots of legumes, lots of variety of fruit and vegetables. Like every day they have lots of fruit and vegetables. They do have yogurt and milk, and I think if you can tolerate that, perhaps. Depending on your level of inflammation. I'm not a huge fan of milk, but yogurt I'll sort of let people use, but in context, a lot of people are lactose intolerant, so it's not probably the first thing that I would recommend people do. They also don't have large amounts of fish, seafood, or eggs, or even chicken for that matter, and any high fat dairy like cheddar cheeses and stuff like that. They limit all those things to a couple of times a week. Red meat they limit to about once a month or twice a month. Alcohol is minimized. Dietary fats come mostly from nuts, seeds, olives, avocados, and olive oil, essentially. So we know that the Mediterranean diet balances out the gut bacteria, not only the composition but also how it functions, and it helps reduce the risk of disease. There have been thousands and thousands of studies on the Mediterranean diet, and I suggest to people when they're putting their own diet together, and I'm going to come back on Wednesday and talk about prebiotic foods and probiotic foods and those sorts of things, but when you're putting your own diet together, the things that I recommend is that you have protein, fat and fiber in every meal. And that can be plant proteins as well as animal proteins. I think it's good to mix it up. Another thing that I recommend is that you don't have the same things over and over and over every day. That's problematic. The people that come and sit in front of me and go, oh, I don't need to do a food diary because I eat the same things every day, they are the people with the biggest gut problems. The people with the least gut problems that I see that are coming for maintenance and things like that are people who eat a really wide array of fruit and veg. They don't eat the same thing. They tend not to eat the same thing day in, day out. They tend to sort of rotate foods on a regular basis. So it's best to watch things on foods in particular, like eggs and things like that. It's best to leave a break. And even fruit and veg, I think it's really nice to increase your diversity by having wait every couple of days to eat the same thing. And I know that that's not always practical, but they would be my top tips for today about your diet. Make sure you get protein, fat and fiber. Make sure you drink enough water, because without the water, we need water to, we're 60 to 70% water, so it makes sense that we need it for every bodily function. It helps lubricate the poo to get it out. It helps our blood pressure. It helps our core temperature. It helps the viscosity of our blood. So it's really worthwhile